The boy didn't remember how long he had been in chains only that time. Felt like something that belonged to other people now. Maybe weeks, maybe months. His wrists bore the truth more clearly than any calendar could. The raw, red grooves where the ropes had bitten into his skin had begun to harden into scars. His ankles, too, bruised and cracked from marching barefoot across gravel and dirt. They had taken his shoes early, along with his name. He was young, perhaps 14 or 15, but hunger and fear had aged him into someone unrecognizable. His hair was a matted mess. His cheeks were hollow. The color in his eyes, once bright and curious, had dulled into gray caution. The last time he had spoken, really spoken, had been when he cried for his mother as they dragged him from his village. But that sound had faded quickly, first from his throat, and then from his mind. There was no one to listen, and no mercy in the eyes of the men who transported him like freight. Now he stood under the blazing frontier sun, lined up with other captives in the slave pen just outside the lawless mining town of Deadwood. The auction block was nothing more than a platform of rotting boards and broken dignity. Men and women were tied to fence posts, displayed like goods for sale. Young women with eyes full of defiance, old men already too weak to lift their heads. The boy stood among them, but apart from them, he was the smallest, the quietest, and the most likely to be overlooked. Until the auctioneer barked his number. Lot 7. The man shouted, spitting into the dust. Strong enough to haul lumber. Clean bones. Young enough to train without questions. The boy flinched as a man in a vest stepped forward and gripped his jaw roughly, turning his face left and right. Another examined his arms like they were checking for cracks in a plank of wood. A third bidder grabbed his shoulder and pressed down hard, testing his pain response. The boy said nothing. Not because he didn't want to speak, but because he no longer knew if anyone would hear him. They didn't want words from him. They wanted silence, obedience, and muscle. Coins clinked together in greedy hands as buyers called out bids. $3, $5, $6, and not a cent more. The auctioneer laughed cruelly, going once, going twice. And then, it happened. From the edge of the crowd, a soft voice cut through the noise like a sudden breeze on a still day. 10. Everyone turned. She stood just beyond the shadow of the saloon's balcony, wrapped in a long black shawl that fluttered slightly in the breeze. A wide-brimmed hat veiled most of her face, but her poised all still, in strangely commanded silence. No one recognized her. She wasn't from town, not a barmaid, not a rancher's wife, not anyone's widow that the locals knew, but she stepped forward with certainty, her black boots kicking up dust with each slow step. The auctioneer blinked. $10, he echoed, startled. She nodded once, then reached into her satchel and produced a velvet pouch. When she tossed it onto the stage, the sound of silver coins spilling across wood silenced the entire crowd. No one dared match the price. The boy looked up for the first time, not at the coins, but at her. He couldn't see her face clearly, but he saw her eyes. Not cruel, not greedy, just calm. She stepped forward and without a word, took a small knife from her belt and cut the rope from his wrists. The fibers fell to the ground like the final threads of a nightmare. She didn't offer her name. She didn't even touch him. She only said 3 words. Follow me, boy. And he did. Not because he trusted her. Not because he hoped for kindness. But because, for the first time in a long time, someone looked at him not like a tool. Not like property, but like a human being. And he didn't want to lose that feeling. The woman said little as she walked away from the auction yard, her boots quiet against the dry ground. The boy trailed a few feet behind, unsure whether to feel frightened or grateful or both. The townsfolk still stared as they passed. Some whispered, others laughed nervously, but none dared speak to her directly. It was as if her very presence commanded a kind of silent respect tinged with unease. She led him through the cluttered edge of town, past crumbling sheds and broken wagons, until they reached a horse tethered beneath a rusted water tower. A black mare, with wild eyes and a silver-studded saddle. She mounted it in a single, fluid motion, and looked down at the boy. "You ride?" she asked. He shook his head, hesitant. She nodded, not disappointed, just thoughtful. Then she leaned down, extended a hand, and pulled him up behind her, like he weighed nothing at all. They rode in silence, the wind kicking dust around them as Deadwood shrank in the distance. The boy didn't know where they were going. He clung lightly to the back of her coat, uncertain of whether he should hold on tighter. She didn't speak, didn't explain. She just rode, her posture straight, eyes fixed ahead, like someone with a purpose deeper than the road itself. For hours they traveled through hills, patches of dying trees, and shallow creek beds. The boy's mind raced with questions, but his mouth stayed shut. Who was she? Why had she paid for him? Was he just being taken to another place to be sold again? But there was something different about her. She hadn't struck him, hadn't shouted, hadn't looked at him with the hunger or scorn the others did. And though her silence was sharp, it didn't carry cruelty. It felt more like a shield she wore around her heart. As night fell, she finally slowed the horse and led them off the main trail into a dense thicket of pines. Nestled in a clearing, sat a small log cabin, half covered in ivy, with a stone chimney puffing a faint line of smoke into the dusk. It looked old but sturdy, lived in but untouched. A single oil lamp glowed from the inside. "This is where we stop," she said, sliding off the horse. The boy followed her lead, legs aching from the ride. She opened the creaking wooden door and gestured for him to step inside. The air inside the cabin was warm and smelled of herbs and old wood. A fire crackled softly in the hearth. There were only 2 rooms, a kitchen with a small table and shelves of dried goods, and a bedroom with a narrow cot and a rocking chair by the window. On the wall hung a faded quilt. On the table rested a worn Bible and a tin cup of cold tea. "Sit," she said quietly, and he obeyed. She moved with quiet efficiency, removing her hat, unwrapping her shawl, and placing a pot over the fire. The boy finally saw her face. Pale, elegant, with dark eyes that carried years of sorrow beneath them. A scar traced the line of her jaw, faint but unmistakable. Her hair was braided in a tight loop. She looked like someone who had survived more than she had spoken of and refused to be broken by any of it. She served him a bowl of hot stew and placed it before him without ceremony. He stared at it: meat, potatoes, broth, real food. He tried to eat slowly, but hunger won, and soon he was scraping the bowl. She watched him but said nothing. Then, after a long pause, she finally spoke again. "You'll sleep here tonight. Tomorrow, we talk." He nodded, unsure what talk would mean. "Don't worry," she added after a beat, her voice gentler. "No one will hurt you here." It was the first time anyone had said something like that to him. Not in a whisper, not in pity, just simple, solid truth. He nodded again, slower this time. Something heavy inside him loosened as she disappeared into the other room. The boy sat alone by the fire, warmth wrapping around his bruised limbs like a blanket. He didn't even know her name, but in that moment, it didn't matter. For the first time, in what felt like forever, he wasn't afraid to fall asleep. The boy woke before sunrise, unsure at first of where he was. For a moment, he panicked, expecting chains, cold, shouting, but none came. Only the soft glow of early morning filtered through the window, and the sound of someone chopping wood outside. The fire in the hearth had died down to embers. A folded blanket lay over his legs, one he didn't remember pulling up. His bowl from the night before had been washed and dried, sitting neatly on the table beside a slice of bread and a tin cup of water. It was the kind of care that was so simple, so human, it made his chest ache. He hadn't known comfort like this since before he crept outside. The air was cool and smelled of pine. The woman stood near a chopping block, splitting logs with smooth, practiced movements. She didn't look at him, but she knew he was there. "You sleep all right?" she asked, still chopping. He nodded silently. "I don't like repeating myself," she said, glancing toward him now. "So when I ask something, speak up." "Yes, ma'am," he said, voice barely above a whisper. She studied him a moment longer, then nodded once and handed him a smaller axe. "Help me with the kindling." He took it without question. They worked quietly, side by side. It wasn't easy. His arms were still sore, and his hands trembled from exhaustion, but he didn't complain. She didn't praise him, didn't scold him, only corrected his grip once and moved on. It was hard, honest work, and for the first time in what felt like years, he wasn't afraid of making a mistake. After they finished, she set a pot of oats over the fire inside and finally sat across from him at the table. "I didn't buy you to use you," she said. Matter of fact. He looked up, unsure what to say. "I saw what they were going to do, what they'd already done. I wasn't going to leave you there." She paused. "You're free." He blinked. The word sounded foreign in his ears. Free. It had been so long since he'd heard anyone say it without a cruel laugh afterward. "I don't have anywhere to go," he admitted quietly. She nodded. "Then stay here. For now." He hesitated. "Why?" She stirred her oats slowly. "Because no one should go back to the world after what you've been through, not without knowing they still have a soul." He said nothing for a long while. Then, finally, "My name's Jacob. At least, that's what I think it was before." "Jacob," she repeated, testing it on her tongue. "All right then, what's yours?" She hesitated. "Claire." The name settled in the room like a soft wind through open shutters. Jacob watched her carefully. Her eyes were calm, but not cold. She looked like someone who had learned how to carry grief without dropping it, like a woman who had been broken once, then put herself back together, one jagged piece at a time. "Are you really a widow?" he asked, too quickly. She didn't answer right away. Her spoon paused in midair. "I was," she said finally, "a long time ago. I buried him under an oak tree on the ridge." Jacob opened his mouth to apologize, but she waved it off. "I've buried a lot," she said. "A husband, a son, a life I thought I'd live. So I don't need apologies, Jacob, just honesty." He nodded, heart thudding. "You're safe here," she said again, "but if you stay, you work. I won't feed a boy who waits for the world to fix him. Understand?" "Yes, ma'am." "Don't call me ma'am," she said, almost smiling. "I'm not that old." He smiled too, just a little, his first in a long time, and in that small, flickering moment between them, something unspoken passed. Not exactly trust, not yet, but something like it, a bargain sealed in silence. Not of ownership, but of survival, respect, and perhaps, the beginning of something like family. Jacob stirred awake to a strange silence, not the silence of fear or isolation, but the kind that comes with safety. The kind that comes after months of being yelled at, kicked, pulled by ropes, and stuffed into cramped wagons. For the first time in memory, he hadn't slept with one eye open or flinched at phantom footsteps. He sat up slowly, blinking against the gentle orange of the morning sun that poured through the small cabin window. The fire had burned down to its last embers. His arms were sore from days of being tied and beaten, but something else stirred. In his chest, something softer. The rough blanket that covered him had been tucked in carefully. On the table, someone had placed a slice of bread, a tin cup filled with water, and a small apple with a blemish on one side. It wasn't much, but to Jacob, it felt like a feast from another world. He looked around, unsure what to do, until he heard the rhythmic thud of an axe outside. He rose, still limping slightly, and stepped through the creaky door into the cold morning air. Claire stood near a pile of firewood, dressed in a dark blouse and worn trousers. Her sleeves were rolled up to the elbows, and her expression was calm and focused as she brought the axe down in clean, powerful strokes. She didn't glance at him when he stepped out, but somehow she still seemed to know he was there. "You sleep all right?" she asked. Jacob hesitated. "Yes," he said quietly. She stopped, wiped her brow, and looked over her shoulder at him. "Good," she replied. "Pick up that hatchet by the stump. If you're going to eat here, you'll work." He blinked at the tool she pointed to, surprised but also strangely relieved. No beatings, no shouting, just instructions, plain and simple. He obeyed and grabbed the hatchet. It felt heavy in his hands, but not heavier than the things he had already carried. Claire didn't hover or mock his clumsy grip. She simply showed him how to hold it, correct his angle, and went back to her own work. For a while, they worked in silence. Jacob struggled at first, but she didn't rush him. Each successful swing built a little more confidence. Each breath of cold pine-scented air helped push out the stench of the slave wagons. After nearly an hour, she gestured for him to stop. "That's enough," she said. "Come in, you've earned breakfast." Back inside the cabin, she stirred a pot of oats over the fire. It was a simple meal: oats, hot water, and a pinch of salt, but it filled Jacob's hollow stomach like a miracle. He ate slowly this time, trying not to appear desperate. She watched him quietly. "I didn't bring you here to keep you as property," she said suddenly, as if reading his thoughts. "You're not a servant, you're not a slave, you're free." He looked up, startled. "But why?" Claire sat across from him, her gaze steady. "Because I've been hurt before, and I've watched others be hurt. I know what it does to a soul. I wasn't going to leave you in that place, not while I had the means to stop it." Jacob said nothing for a long moment. Then, with a nervous edge in his voice, he whispered, "I don't have anywhere to go." "Then stay," she said. "For now." He hesitated. "You're not afraid I'll steal from you or run?" "I've lived alone a long time," she said. "If you wanted to run, you would have run already. And if you steal, then you'll learn what it means to lose trust. That's punishment enough." Jacob lowered his gaze. "My name's Jacob, I think. That's what I was called when I was little." Claire gave a soft nod. "Then Jacob it is." He looked at her more closely now. Her face was quiet, but not cold. She had lines around her mouth that came from grief, not age. A small scar traced the edge of her jaw. She looked like someone who had seen a battlefield no one else knew about and lived through it alone. "Are you really a widow?" he asked, his voice almost apologetic. "I was," she replied. "A long time ago. I lost my husband and my son. I'm sorry." She shook her head. "Don't be. You've lost something too. We both have." Jacob didn't know how to answer that, but it stayed with him long after the conversation ended. Claire didn't offer comfort with her hands or her tone. She offered it through quiet honesty, through food, through shelter, and through the space she gave him to feel human again. As the fire cracked behind them, and the day began to stretch its light through the woods outside, Jacob realized something. This wasn't just a roof, it was the beginning of healing. The peace Jacob was beginning to feel didn't last long. It came suddenly, as so many troubles do, in the form of a distant clatter hoofbeats on stone. Jacob heard it first, out beyond the ridge, where the trail split into two directions. One led to the old trading post, the other deeper into the mountains. He paused in the middle of gathering eggs, listening. The sound was too controlled for wild horses. Too many hooves, too little panic. Riders, at least 3 of them, maybe more. He dropped the basket and ran toward the cabin. Claire was already on the porch, rifle in hand. She wasn't aiming it, but she wasn't lowering it either. "You see them?" he asked, breathless. She gave a small nod. "Coming slow. Not bandits, I don't think. Not yet." Jacob squinted. A cloud of dust moved like a ghost along the trail. Riders, yes, but they wore dark coats, uniforms with wide-brimmed hats and cold posture. "Slavers?" Jacob asked, the word catching like a splinter in his throat. Claire didn't answer right away. "Too early to say, but you should go inside." "No," She looked at him. I'm not hiding, he said. Not again. For a long moment, she didn't reply. Then she nodded once and handed him a small pistol. Do you remember how to use it? He nodded. They stood together on the porch as the riders approached. 3 of them. 2 men, 1 woman. Their horses were thin, but strong, like they'd been traveling for days. Dust caked their boots. One of the men wore a scar across his jaw. The woman had a badge tucked beneath her coat. She didn't bother to flash, but didn't fully hide either. Claire didn't lower the rifle. Morning, the man with the scar said, tipping his hat. Claire nodded. We're looking for someone, the woman said. A boy, escaped from a holding pen 3 weeks ago. About his age, she pointed to Jacob without looking at him directly. He's mine, Claire said calmly. That's so, the scarred man asked. Bought him fair. From the auction outside, Dry Creek, have the papers inside if you'd like to read. The woman hesitated. We heard he was stolen. Claire didn't blink. No one stole anything. You want to search? Get a warrant. The third man stepped forward. Easy, ma'am. We're just following reports. Well, your reports are wrong. Jacob's hands were sweating on the pistol handle tucked into his belt behind him. He remembered these kinds of men. The tone, the arrogance. They always walked like they owned the land. They always thought every poor soul owed them an answer. The woman dismounted. She walked to the edge of the porch, peered at Jacob. You speak, boy. Jacob swallowed hard. Yes, ma'am. You run from Dry Creek. He looked at Claire, then back at the woman. I was sold, chained, starved. I didn't, Renai survived. The woman stared at him for a moment, expression unreadable. Then she turned to Claire. You got those papers? Claire didn't lower. The rifle, inside, I'll fetch them. You 3 stay right there. She disappeared into the cabin. The man with the scar stepped closer to Jacob. You sure about your story, boy? I am now, Jacob said, his voice low. A minute later, Claire returned, holding a weathered folder. She handed it over. The woman opened it, eyes scanning the contents. A bill of purchase. Claire's signature, an official seal, faint but still legible. It was real. Looks like this checks out, the woman said, nodding. The scarred man didn't look pleased. We'll be moving on, the woman said. Apologies for the trouble. No apology needed, Claire said. Just don't come looking again. The riders turned and headed back the way they came. Dust curled in the wake of their horses, fading slowly. Jacob exhaled, finally letting go of the breath he didn't know he'd been holding. Claire turned to him. You okay? He nodded, even though he wasn't sure. She gave him a long look. We may need to leave here soon. Jacob blinked. Why? They believed you. She didn't answer right away. Men like that always come back. Jacob stood beside her on the porch, pistol still tucked in his belt. Something had shifted again. Not just fear, not just survival, but resolve. He had come to her door a slave, but now, he was something else, someone worth defending, someone who would defend. In return, the days that followed were quiet but not peaceful. Claire and Jacob kept working the land, feeding the animals, chopping wood, repairing fences. Yet something in the air had shifted since the riders left. A sharpness, like the first chill before winter, something you couldn't see, but you felt in your bones. Claire had packed a small satchel by the door, just in case. Jacob noticed she slept with her rifle within arm's reach. Now he didn't ask questions, not at first. He'd learned. Claire didn't like to speak of things before she was ready, but something about the way she moved through the cabin, pausing often at the windows, told him there was a story behind her quiet fear. A story buried deep, with scars of its own. One evening, as a storm rolled in and rain began to tap gently against the tin roof, Jacob finally spoke. Who were you? Before all this, Claire didn't respond right away. She poured water into the kettle, lit the flame beneath it, and stirred the fire in the hearth. I was someone's wife. Someone's mother, she said softly. I wore dresses. Laughed. More. Thought the world was a place you could reason with. Jacob leaned forward in his chair. What happened to them? Claire stared into the fire, and for a long moment, it seemed she wasn't going to answer. But then she did, her voice as steady as the flames, dancing in the hearth. My husband, Daniel, worked as a scout for the Union during the war. He believed in freedom, spoke up for the ones no one else would. That made him dangerous. Jacob listened in silence. They came one night, men who didn't wear uniforms but carried rifles like soldiers. They wanted to make an example of him. Said he'd helped a group of freedmen escape a raid near the river. I told them it was a lie. Her voice faltered for the first time. They didn't care. Burned our barn. Shot Daniel on the porch. Took my boy, Jonah. He was only 8. Jacob's heart thudded in his chest. What happened to him? I don't know, Claire said, her voice a whisper. I never saw him again. Silence settled like dust between them. The only sound was the fire cracking and the wind pressing gently against the cabin walls. Jacob wanted to say something. Anything but words felt useless in the face of such pain. Claire finally turned to him, her eyes clear but tired. That's why I don't flinch when someone comes looking to take what they think they're owed. I've already lost everything once. I won't lose it again. Jacob swallowed the lump in his throat. That's why you bought me. Claire didn't answer. She didn't need to. Jacob stood up slowly and walked to the shelf near the door. There, beside a jar of flour and a folded map, was the pistol she had given him during the standoff. He picked it up and turned it over in his hands. I'll protect this place too, he said. Claire looked up, surprised. I might not be strong yet, he continued, but I'm not afraid of them. Not anymore. She studied him. For a moment, the firelight caught her face in such a way that Jacob saw not just the grief but the strength beneath it. The woman who had survived hell and carved peace out of wildland. The woman who had chosen to save him, not for reward or pity but because it was right. Then we'll fight together, she said. The kettle began to whistle. Claire poured tea into 2 mismatched mugs. She handed one to Jacob and raised hers. In a quiet toast, 2 ghosts we've buried, she said, and the one's still chasing us, he added. They clinked cups gently. Outside, the storm gathered strength, lightning flashing far in the distance. But inside, for the first time in days, the 2 of them shared something stronger than fear. Solidarity. A promise. Unspoken but understood. They were no longer alone in this world, and no matter who came riding down that trail next, they wouldn't be facing it in silence. Not anymore. The storm passed, but the sense of tension remained like a stain in the soil. Jacob had changed. In only a few weeks, he had gone from a silent, wounded shell of a boy to someone learning to walk tall again. He moved with purpose, now wood, with confident strikes, guiding the mule with a steady hand, fixing a broken fence post without waiting to be told. But Claire noticed something else in him too. At night, when he thought she wasn't watching, Jacob would stare into the fire, eyes far away, as if listening for the return of ghosts. Sometimes he mumbled names. Sometimes he flinched at distant sounds. It wasn't over for him, not yet, and maybe never completely. But he was fighting his way forward. Then came the smoke. It rose on the 3rd morning after the storm, just as dawn cracked the sky open with pale gold. Claire saw it first in gray, curling above the trees beyond the northern ridge. Jacob followed her gaze, and felt the same jolt in his chest. That's close, he said. Claire nodded. Too close. Without a word, she saddled the old chestnut mare. Jacob did the same with the mule. They rode in silence, keeping to the tree line, avoiding the open plains. When they reached the top of the ridge, they dismounted and crept forward. Below them, in a shallow valley, smoke poured from a burned-out wagon. Its canvas top was scorched, and its wheels splintered. 3 bodies lay on the ground, nearby 2 adults, 1 child. Jacob's stomach clenched. Claire scanned the horizon. They were heading east, she said, probably from the mountain pass. Ambushed. Slavers. Jacob asked, voice low. Maybe, she said, or worse. They descended slowly, warily, rifles drawn. The smell hit them first, burned flesh and old gunpowder. Claire knelt beside one of the bodies, a woman. Her face was turned toward the earth, her dress torn. A rifle lay inches from her hand, unfired. She fought, Claire murmured. Jacob walked toward the wagon. In the wreckage, something glinted metal, a medallion, singed at the edges, but still intact. He picked it up and wiped away the soot. It bore the mark of a traveling preacher's wagon. His heart sank. Not slavers, just wanderers, innocents. We need to go, Claire said, rising. They'll be back. Jacob didn't move. He looked out across the valley. Why do they keep doing this? What do they want? Claire's voice was like flint. They want fear. They want silence. And they want to remind us they can still take anything they please. Jacob clenched his fists. Then we remind them. We're not theirs to take. They buried the bodies, marking the graves with stones. Claire whispered a prayer she hadn't spoken in years, her voice soft and cracking with sorrow. By the time they returned to the cabin, the sun was high and hot. Claire began checking the traps around the perimeter. Jacob, still holding the medallion in his pocket, couldn't shake the image of the burned wagon from his mind. Something in him had shifted again, not just fear now, not even just survival. It was anger, a clean, burning fury that refused to be buried. That night, as they sat beside the fire, Jacob said, "We can't wait anymore." Claire looked at him. Wait for what? For them to come to us. For someone else to speak up. There are others like me out there. Others like that family, still chained, still hunted. Claire stirred the fire with a long iron poker. You want to fight. I want to do something. You saved me, Claire, and I think it's time I saved someone too. She was silent for a long moment. Then she nodded once. If that's what you want, you won't do it alone. Jacob blinked. You'd come. Claire met his eyes. What else is left? Jacob. This land's only worth living on if we make it different than what we found. If you're ready to fight, I won't let you fight without a family beside you. Jacob swallowed hard, his chest full of something that almost hurts, something that might have been hope. They began planning that night. Truth supplies, places to avoid, people they could trust. The cabin would no longer be just a shelter, it would become a base, and Jacob no longer a slave. No longer a frightened boy was becoming something entirely new. A fighter, a liberator, a flame in a world full of darkness. The morning they left, the prairie was still. Claire locked the cabin door and took one last look at the place she'd called home for 7 years. The porch where Daniel once sat with coffee. The window Jonah used to peek through when thunder frightened him. And the woodshed where a quiet, broken boy once stacked firewood as though his life depended on it. Maybe it had. Jacob stood beside her, now not the same boy she'd pulled off that auction block. His shoulders were square. His hands were calloused. His eyes, once hollow, now burned with something dangerous and pure. Purpose. Their wagon was modest 2 mules, a canvas top, crates filled with dried beans, salt, ammo, and maps, a shovel, rope, 2 hunting rifles, and Claire's revolver. Everything they owned could be carried, and everything they'd built was now memory. "You sure you're ready for this?" Claire asked. Jacob didn't hesitate. "I've never been more sure of anything." They headed west. Not toward any town or settlement, but toward whispered names passed among travelers. Places where the enslaved still ran, where children were still dragged off in the night, where justice didn't yet reach. Jacob had a list he'd kept folded in his shirt pocket. He called it the unfinished. Names of places he remembered. Names he'd heard in hushed tones behind wagon wheels and barn doors. Claire hadn't questioned him once about it. By the second night, they reached a wooded grove where a small fire could be hidden between rocks. Jacob caught 2 rabbits with a trap he'd carved himself. Claire cleaned them. They ate in silence. Then came the sound. It started faint hooves, distant and quick. Too quick. Claire and Jacob dropped their tins and doused the fire in one motion. Voices followed. Not English. Something older. Jacob leaned in. "Lakota," he whispered. "I think." Claire peered into the dark. Shapes moved between the trees. Then a voice called out, this time in broken English. "Travelers, we mean no harm. Show yourselves." Claire hesitated. Then she stood slowly, rifle in hand, but lowered. "We're not a threat," she called back. "Just passing through." A group of riders emerged into the firelight. 4 men and 2 women. They wore braided hair, leather, and beads, feathers tied to their horses' manes. The man who had spoken had deep lines on his face and a necklace of bone and turquoise. "You speak with caution," he said, nodding at Claire. "You have reason to." Jacob stepped forward. "We've seen what's been done to travelers on this trail. We buried a family not far from here. Their wagon was burned." The man's eyes sharpened. "We saw the smoke. We came to look." "You buried them?" "Yes," Claire said. "They deserved better." The group dismounted. The woman among them studied Jacob with a strange intensity. "You are not like most whites," she said. "Not free, but not a prisoner." Jacob lifted his chin. "I was bought out of bondage. Now I'm free." "Then why go back into danger?" "Because others aren't free yet," he said, "and we can't wait for justice to come from the cities. It has to start with us." The man nodded solemnly. "We are scouts from a northern camp. There are many like your runaways, ex-slaves, native children taken by bounty hunters. We shelter who we can, but the enemy is wide, organized." Jacob stepped forward. "Then we'll help. However we can." Silence passed between them. Then, the man extended his hand. "My name is 2 Eagles. We ride again at dawn. If you wish, ride with us." Claire looked at Jacob. No words were needed. They broke camp and joined the others at sunrise. By midday, they reached a hidden valley where tents lined the riverbank. Dozens of families gathered under pines. Jacob saw faces like his, scars like his, eyes once afraid, now alert. Children laughing, women sharpening blades, young men building watchtowers from logs. It was a sanctuary and a fortress. 2 Eagles stood before the crowd that afternoon. "We welcome new friends today. A woman who buried her dead and fought the darkness with her own hands. A boy once sold, now walking with fire in his chest. They do not ask for shelter, they ask to fight." A cheer rose. Claire laid a hand on Jacob's shoulder. He looked up at her, not as a child, not as a servant, but as a partner. For the first time in his life, Jacob didn't feel like he was running from anything. He was running toward something, a mission. A war worth fighting, a future worth bleeding for. And the boy they once tried to sell now stood at the center of a growing storm, one that would not die quietly.